All right, Devils, how we doing? Happy Monday. Here we are, the 9th of December, and pretty good participation in the poll here. I'm always glad to see that. A lot of interest in some of the big alts here. I'm gonna try and get as many of them as I can here. So we'll start with Link. Now, we can probably do this pretty quickly because we've been over this count several times, and there's a few things here we can maybe talk about here. So I've got just kind of key levels here being wicked off, and as we've been through this count a couple of times here, I think it's reasonable off of this low that we have our impulse, and now we've gone into an A, into an expanded B, and we're working down for the C here. So this all still corrective, but really, I mean, you could say, okay, we got a big box here. So typically when you see something like that, it seems, well, let's check our levels. So just coming from the top to the low here, well, here's a 50, and we go from our low here on Binance. All right, so looking at this here, obviously we've broken golden zone here. We come down. This is, looks like this structure is what ultimately held it here. These buyers defending here. So, but what's interesting here, despite that break, if you look here, well, now we're right back into that golden zone. So that it's not unreasonable that could be holding us up here, but it's questionable, right? Since we've already had the break here. You'd have to, at this point, this algo is in control, right? So, and then if we measure it from, if I can get in there, that low to here, right? It's almost the exact same. Interesting here. So we're tagging the 707. This got just a hair deeper, but now we tag the 707, and you could really kind of just look at these two pivots and just draw them over here, and then of course that all coincides with this low volume area where we just don't have market acceptance, right? You can see it's resistance, support, resistance, gets through. Now we're going to hold here for support. Well, if you're a Link bull, as I am, we don't have great signs of buyers stepping in at the moment, but this is not a reasonable place. There's certainly a low risk trade here. Very low risk trade to be a buyer here. Now there's a couple of other things here just in terms of just some teachable moments here. Let me clear some of this off here so we can see it. This is all right. So if you're an Elliottician, this count makes sense. All right, the count there's a 5 coming down. I'm on a 3-hour here. It's tied to really what's defining it is this ABC here, right? And we had talked about the idea that there was a couple of different ways this count could have played, but since we don't get an impulse and then we roll over, from an Elliott perspective, the ABC here followed by the 5 down seems like the most reasonable count to be attaching here. Now, it's tempting to want to pick the turn, right? You can always maybe give that a little more juice up here. Maybe we come up, we bump into the Vegas wave here, a little retrace, and then that's a safer way to play it. You're not going to get the turn, but really, if it goes, right, if we get the move out of here into a third, if this is 1, 2, well, pardon me, if this is 1, 2, 1, 2, if that goes, right, are you really worried about whether you got the turn? Yeah, I know, looks good on your Twitter feed, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. I want to see a little more juice come out of here. I mean, even down on the 1 hour. It's just kind of sideways. So you can identify, okay, we're clearly at a basing level here. So is it accumulation? Here on the hourly, look at the Vegas wave, just holding this down. Do you want to be a buyer right into it? I can understand the thinking there, but you've just got obvious resistance here. So rather than just go, well, kind of, I like the look. That again, you could take the trade here. So maybe a small piece. Even if we really zoom in here, well, maybe 1, 2, but if it's 1, 2, does this look like it's the start of it? Is it really going to be that small? Get that off. Really? Maybe. I don't know that I'd go hard on that. All right, so if this is the 4 into the 5. Maybe, okay, from the low here, so there was that 707 seems to be coming into play, but really we're kind of just chopping sideways. There's really not a lot here to work with, so I suppose you could probably do something like that and say bullish above. All right, so that might be a. I feel like I'm talking you into a trade here. I mean, I think it's not unreasonable to get for some volume here. I wouldn't lever up here. I mean, really, the better trade here with the sell. Of course, I have in hindsight, right? Of course, I get that, right? But let me just show you what. Here's some. We're going to do a whole new series on geometry and in particular on trend lines because I think that we don't give that enough attention here. So let me just show you this kind of a decent example here. So you look at this chart here, and the obvious pivots here stand out. Our high, our low, this right. In this case, whatever this swing here, let's call it that. So you just kind of eyeball it here, and you can say, well, I can see a couple of things just right off the bat. Even if you were just kind of trying to identify, all right, how about some trend identification? And so, I mean, we're too far over here. If I just grab this last little pivot here, I want to come up, I want to get that little pivot right there. Well, look what we do right over here. Right? Look how we're just tagging into that. So this would be our baseline, our bullish trend line. Well, now if I pull that up here, now, sure, I could go up here. But I'm kind of noticing here, I like this right here. So this seems to be, you know, we're catching this. Now, this question, you could bring it down here just so you get this pivot here. So we have this pivot, this pivot, this pivot. Yeah, we get a little bit through. We're getting right here. And then so do you see how perfectly that's framing the market? But then you'd have the exact same thing the other direction here. So from here, note this. If we grab this, get in on that pivot. Now again, I'm noticing these two pivots over here and looking at how I can catch all of this down here. So if I wanted to get that pivot, I put it right there. Now let's change that color just to distinguish them. So this, right, critical pivot here. This, are we going to have the same kind of thing? Right, so you would at least, if you're a buyer here, this is giving you some confidence. Okay, I'm testing the support level here. So I've got a combination. I've got just straight structural prior resistance potentially holding as support here. So any buyers that bought maybe the breakout here, this is a reasonable spot, whether they bought here or they've been holding here, they're defending here. Because this was the big break before we went down. Now, if they stayed with it, right, they're feeling pain here. Now, relief. Now we're back here. They got to defend again. So this would be worthwhile because now, if we look at this, if this is going to start to go, right. Well, first thing we got to get through is that little intersection. As we hit center line, right, that would set that up. Likely, there's algo participation. You could anticipate there. So if this is going to come up, right, how would we? Right, look what we get right here. I mean that, right, so look here, you got this upsloping, this downsloping. This would put us at the intersection of the midline here with the downsloping. So where's your advantage here? I don't know that you have one. I mean, other than leaning into the Elliott count. Okay, it looks like maybe I've got 1, 2. I've got a correction. I can identify a pattern here. And then given all of this, well, okay, so I've got some room to move here, but this is what you'd be hoping for as a bull is this. Right? So we come up here, anticipate the resistance here, right? And just again, you can just kind of look here, just drag that over. Plenty of sellers here are going to defend. So this, if it's going to come back down, well, here I know this gets crowded. We'll leave that up there. So if it's going to come back this way, right, so then we'd be back to golden zone here. So you're anticipating, okay, I got to get up to get to this, right? But then you're going to run into that structure, all of that up there. Look, prior resistance, right? Can you get through? That's what we need here. So until you get there, you can't really start leaning into the idea that, okay, I'm off into a new impulse. So what do you have here? It's just you really just have a big box. So how do you get an advantage over that? Well, you know, out here at this degree, you could make a case. Well, here, so we'll look at it from both directions. Okay, let me show you this. Let me do it this way. Let's just turn this into a trend line. Okay, so there's our. I can do it right. So there's our upsloping trend line. Here's fuck, hang on a sec. Let me try and get that. There we go. Okay, let's bring it down this way. All right, so let's just forget the channel for the time being. Let's just focus on the trend lines. All right, two clear trend lines with an apex here, which we're headed to it. So it wouldn't be terribly surprising to do something like this before we get here and we get the final decision. Right now, I'm a bull. I'm a crypto bull, so my bias is always higher. Right, I acknowledge that. Right, I know that. I know that that's something I have to pay attention to because I have that natural bias. Right, it's much like we talk about this in the equities market. There's always 100% of the time, always a bias for the market to go up. Doesn't mean it's always going to go up, obviously, but if it can, right, the path of least resistance always higher, always in the market. Now, we don't different markets here in crypto, but I'm recognizing here my own bias, and most of us, I think. Maybe not all of us. Right, if you're in this space, we want crypto to be successful. We want these assets to increase in value. So is there an opportunity here? Well, you could make a case here that, well, let me show it to you on the sell side here. So as we're coming up here, so we have, pardon me, on the buy side, that actually sets up the sell. So we have this base of support down here. Well, as we're moving up here, we do get, if you just used a trend line here, you're getting a pretty good ramp up here as this is being tested. So it's the steepness of this. Now, it's a little bit unusual here to be demonstrating here within the context of an Elliott count, but because you wouldn't have known that was the B until this started to come down. You wouldn't have known. You've been anticipating, because this A looks like the 1, 2. So you might have been here thinking, okay, there, I've got my 1, my 2. Now I'm anticipating from here, maybe it's a shallow 2, we're going to go, right? So it looks like up we go, and we run into all that structure. We run into the algo from up above, right? They can't get through, right? So it falls over. So here's actually the trade that was there. And I just want you to look at this visually. Right, so you wouldn't have known that was coming. So all you have here now is we've got the gap here. This is what I want you to see. It's the space between the two trend lines. So we've got the dominant upslope here, and then we get the much steeper version of it here. Even if you went over a little bit on the break, you could have used the break of the Vegas wave. You could have used the trend line break. You could have used a crossover of some smaller, I should say, because I've got a 144, 169. You could use a 21 and a 50 or an 8 and a 30. You could have used a moving average crossover. Could have been an indicator that you were using here. So note here. So as we're up here, look at the RSI. Right. So we have divergence as well. So look, let's see. So all of this is going higher, and then all of this is going lower, right? So then you've got the RSI tagging it up here. As it breaks, you've got the space there. You've got the space to fall from the break of this trend line to come all the way back down to this support. So this was actually a decent looking short trade. Now I say that in the context of having just told you, well, our bias is to the long side. So you can do the exact same thing here to the buy side. So we have this downsloping trend line. We've got the upsloping here. Well, why couldn't we do the exact same thing? Well, of course you can. So let me get you out of here because that trade has come and gone. So same thing from this side, right? We've got this coming this way. So I have space. If we break this, I've got space until we get up here. So we can get that out of there. All right, so if we get this kind of a break, now that can be a trigger to where, okay, I've got a reasonable risk reward here. So look what we can set up. So if you were to buy on a break of that, so let's get, I guess we get this out of here. All right, so that is our target. Let's get this. That's about right. I wouldn't get. You can just use the pivot low here. So if we get the break, shit, that's gonna be a pain in the ass. Let's move you off to the side. All right, so that would get. I guess I got to keep it there so we can see that space in here. Well, sorry. Let me do it this way. Get out of the way. All right, so I got to be able to give you the P&L here. So if we break here. right? That's it right there. Okay, so now I can do this over here. We've got a reference. Okay, so let's break here. Stop under the pivot. Target is right here. So what we get there? There's 3.5 to 1. Not terrible, right? And we don't know, and nothing says it must stop there. Of course, right? We gotta look at that in the context of this. All right. Well, that would put us right up to the 707 and that downsloping trend line. So that's about as much as I would go for there on the long side. So what do we get there? Well, it's 3.52 to 1. It's really not a bad looking trade. But in terms of how that would influence where we are in the Elliott count, assuming, right now that's all just a projection, assuming we get that, which we don't know that we will. But I've got the space. That's what I want you to see. Is I've got the space for it to move until we run into the next downsloping trendline support. So if we were to get something like that coming out of here, you might anticipate it something along these lines. Now we got to get through, right? Or possibly, right? You'll see this often. If it's going to get up, we'll come back down and test. And now we're off. Now we know we've got an impulse, and we know we've got a new trend started here. Right now, I got lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, until I get to my support line. Now, can I get a new trend started of higher highs, higher lows? Well, it remains to be seen. But this would be the ideal scenario. So I've got 1, 2, and then I'd just be starting into the 1. Right, if this is 1, 2, and we're going 1, 2 again, now I'm looking for the 1, 2 of the third. So this just laying the trade out, right? Potentially, boom. Get this one out of here. So there's your little swing trade here, right? We're not shooting for the moon here. Just what's reasonable, just a little swing trade, anticipating all that resistance there. So if we can get up and above, right? So if you want to be ultra conservative, you'd wait for the break, and then here's your trade, right? Here would be the ultra conservative, right? Understanding it's not likely to just do that. I mean, could it? Yeah, of course it could. Right? Anything's possible, right? I could win the lottery tomorrow. But is that more likely? So now you come back here and you go, how about putting all of that together? Well, there'd be the 707, right? For whatever reason, this market is responding to the 707. So you kind of go, oh, okay, 1, 2. What else could we do? Now, once we've got that, then we've got trend. And then we'd be an original on that. There's your target. All right, so you got a little swing trade here, anticipating the resistance. Maybe that starts the retracement, pushes higher, back to retest it. Just using what's here, right? Not trying to do anything but take advantage of what the market is already telling me. Right? What is that intersection point? That's January. That's the end of January. So there's time here for this to develop. But this is something to look for when you can get that, when you can pull back out and get the dominant trend, downtrend, uptrend, and then looking for those spaces where you can trade from one support level to the next. Right? And if you can do that in the context of where you see the Elliott count and then anywhere you can anticipate algos will be responsive, you put yourself together a nice little trade plan. There you go. All right, guys, I'm gonna try and get all three of the ones. Shit, now I got 4 of them. Okay, well, we haven't looked at Ripple in a while either. Okay, let me try and get as many of these done as I can. Okay, guys, talk to you.